Well, social media companies, including Facebook, could be forced to reveal the identities of anonymous users in an effort to crack down on online trolling and defamation. It's under new laws being drafted by the federal government. Will they actually work, though? I spoke to Nigel Phair, who's director of UNSW at the University of New South Wales a short time ago. I started by asking him about his thoughts on whether this will actually work.
The intent, I think, Tom, is good. Yeah, we need to do something about the online environment and how people behave and what they do with their sensibilities. But holistically, it's really not going to work, pretty much like every other piece of cybercrime legislation and related in this country.
What makes you say that specifically?
Well, firstly, people aren't going to know what to do. So if you're the average person out there, how do you action this? How do you take a social media company to court? How do you get them to tell you who the person is behind the troll or whatever the piece of data that you don't like?
So you're the user, someone's abusing you online. Shouldn't there be a little button saying that, well, there is, you can report things to Facebook, right?
There is a report
button. That's the initial thing?
Yes.
What happens from there?
You get an automated response and then you hear nothing.
Right. And so under this legislation, if you want to then take action, couldn't there be another button saying request identity or something?
Well, that's what it could be. And the intent of the legislation is to force the companies to have an Australian office to put some localisation to that. And hopefully the E-Safety Commissioner will do, who already does outstanding work, will do even greater work in this. But it's just really not going to work. The social media companies logically don't want this. They'll bog it down in courts. They're not going to want to ask their users to provide names, addresses, proper email addresses, proper phone numbers. It's on volume. It's not workable.
So you're talking about when people are signing up, that you don't think that will be done properly. Can't that be in the legislation? I mean, when you open a bank account, you have to provide proper ID. Why can't you just apply that to Facebook?
I think on volume it's not going to work. You could put the 100 points of identity, and there's online platforms which allow you to do that. I think the work around for that would be rather large. And your Facebooks at all US companies with data that's stored in the US. So I would suggest they'll have lawyers that say it doesn't apply to them.
But so there'll be a legal challenge. If they lose that, again, I mean, just about everyone's got a bank account. That's a big volume. Why can't that apply to Facebook? Why can't we get them, again, getting these 100 points of ID?
Holistically, I think you could, but practically, I just don't see it working.
Right, but is that just pushback from Facebook?
I think it's pushback.
Would they leave Australia over this?
So no, they won't leave Australia because they make a lot of money. They all make a lot of money. We're a rich jurisdiction. We love clicking on ads and all that sort of stuff. But there's also a core of people that'll be against this for anonymity reasons online, and there's a big push behind that. Now it goes all the way back to things like the Arab Spring, where dissidents were able to get their message out there. Victims of domestic violence want to be on social media but not put their true bona fides out there. And so there's a fear around the edges that some of these edge cases, there'll be partners that will use it for the wrong intent to say, I've been trolled, I've been this, I've been that, I need to find out data.
That can still have a decent test, right? If that person doesn't want to be identified, they can push back and say, I haven't trolled. You've got to have evidence of that.
And the proof of the pudding is always in the eating. If they get down to that tin tax, I think there could be something about it.
So I'm just interested in this point where you say it won't work. What will happen? The government says it wants to pass the legislation. That gets passed. Will it be that Facebook just doesn't implement the 100 points of ID properly? Or how will it actually fall out?
So I think they'll drag their heels because it's a cost and they don't want any cost in their business. So that's the first thing. Then it might eventually come about to being a reportable function, but still we've got to go through court cases, and that's going to be costly. Facebook have got deep pockets, the average Australian not. Now I know the government has said they'll fund some of the early investigations to get some case law. Well, we'll see how that goes. We've had a litany of other legislation in and around, whether it's data breaches and metadata and all these other things, they just don't get used.